I think this is a topic that doesn't get discussed enough, and so I wanted to bring this up today and talk about it a little bit more. So when you look at yeah, when you look at like how DC films are performed in recent years, right? You look at the Batman, Matt Reeves, the Batman, and that movie made like 700, 800, like almost $1 million, right? And then you look at Black Adam, you look at The Flash, you look at Shazam, Fury of the Gods, you even look at Blue Beetle. And these movies, well, let's say they underperformed. It would like in terms of Black Adam, I think you could say it underperformed. Blue Beetle straight up flopped. Shazam, Fear of the Gods flopped. Flash barely made its money back. I don't think it made its money back. I think that flopped too. But the difference is that the Batman takes place in its own separate universe. It's sort of like, yes, under the DC Films banner, but it's not really part of the DCEU. Same goes for Joker. Joker like made $1 billion. So why is it that fans will go watch to the tune of $1 billion a movie like Joker or the Batman? I bet you this Batman Part Two, if it's as good, if not, if even close to being as good as the first Batman, it will probably make $1 billion. Not to mention Joker Folie Deux. But those same fans seemingly don't turn out for like these DCEU movies. Like, why is that? And I wanted to talk about that a little bit more today. So, John, I wanted to start by asking you, like, the question becomes: did the fans lose interest in DC films, or did they just lose interest in the DCEU? Because all of these movies have been coming out like around the same time, but for some reason, the fans that show up to the Batman and Joker just don't show up, and it comes time to watch Black Adam or The Flash. I mean, and The Flash isn't like some unknown DC character. There was a TV show that was on for 10 years featuring The Flash. Like, what do you think is going on here? Like, is there a difference between those two things? Like, or like, why do people watch one and not the other?
I think I will kind of play a little bit of a devil's advocate in this sense because I do think that people are sick of DC in general because I was literally combing through um comments on a lot of groups I'm in terms of like comic book stuff, and a lot of them are just like I just don't care about DC anymore. Not just DCEU, but DC in general. DCEU was sort of like this entire year was just sort of just one long downhill spiral because mainly because James Gunn announced the reboot too soon, and that caused everything this year to flop essentially because nobody really cares about these characters and what they have to say because it's like it's gonna all be moot by next year, not even by 2025, just by next year we're getting a new reboot. So it's like, ah, what's the point? And then on top of that, I think fans have just been so hurt by DC they just don't even want to deal with it anymore. However, it's well, you're probably thinking, well, how does that explain the Batman? How does that explain Joker? It's just the Batman is that good. It's just Batman as a character is that popular that he's almost like separate from DC. And Joker is a subsidiary of that because Joker is with Batman. He is a Batman universe character. So I think he is just the Batman. It did help that it was separate. Don't get me wrong, it did help. But I think there was also the fact that Batman is just so popular and beloved and such a huge cultural icon that people won't care if it's a reboot or a universe or whatnot. So they'll just go see him no matter what because it's Batman. And Joker, it also helped with Joker, like he is also under that Batman banner. A lot of people love Joker. They're like, oh my God, he's the best villain ever. So like people love him. And then on top of that, it did help that there was a lot of controversy with Joker about how like, oh, people are gonna, it's gonna be like the Chicago Dark Knight Rises thing, and people are gonna get hurt or worse. And so there was that controversy, and people, as like the old quote says, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So people went in droves to see Joker because of this controversy. And what I said is because of, people love Batman and Joker is a part of that. So I think though that helped those two characters. And I think um in terms of all these other characters, I think people just became so hurt by the DCU. You have and both sides. It's unfortunately both sides. You have the Snyder fans that hate DC now because like they took Zack Snyder's vision and squandered it and didn't even let him finish it. And then on top of that, you then on the other side you just have the fans that, for lack of a better word, hate Snyder, hate what he did, and even though his vision was never fully done, they're like, well, he was too damaging for the brand, so I'm not even going to bother with these because it's still like his brand and I don't care about any of these characters and that kind of thing. So it's kind of just, it unfortunately got everybody with one fell swoop. DC kind of scorched, it was like a scorched earth sort of thing. Unfortunately, now will James Gunn be able to, be a phoenix and rise from the ashes? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. I do see a lot of people that are still excited for DC and are just kind of like, okay, let's see what he has in store. Let's see what Gunn and Safran have in store. And but there are still a lot of people, depending on who you ask, the majority or the minority, who knows, that it will be non-excitement, but there's still plenty of people that are. So who knows if Superman Legacy is going to make $2 billion or if it's going to be like just a limp sort of it'll make a couple million and then who knows how it'll go from there. But I think there was a lot of hatred towards not just the DCU but DC in general, and the Batman and Joker were just kind of flukes because Batman is just that popular in terms of what I think.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think I disagree with some of what you're saying. I do see that, yeah, there's a little bit of lack of faith in DC today. Not a little, maybe a lot, because obviously when 5 movies flop in a row, well, let's say we got Flash, we had Shazam, we had Blue Beetle, Black Adam. Those 4 flops. Now maybe depending on how Aquaman 2 does, we might have 5 in a row. But before that, like you look at like where DC was, I know Batman v Superman was not like as well received, but it still made almost $900 million. It should have made more than $1 billion, easy. And then you get into movies like Justice League, which we know that was a complete debacle. And then since then, the DCEU has been kind of rudderless because then everything that they had announced up until that point, they sort of changed direction, and they've been in this whole, oh, we're going to not be as connected anymore, and yet the connected universe will continue to exist. So it was just, I think they lost the fans in all that confusion. People just didn't know where they were going with all of this. Not to mention, I think before that they had a couple of good things going. Like the first Wonder Woman movie made like 700-800 million dollars. Like it was basically as successful as the Batman was. So they had like some good stuff. And even Suicide Squad, like the David Ayer Suicide Squad, despite the fact that it wasn't really the version of the movie that he wanted to put out there, it still made like 600 some odd million dollars. It made more money than Man of Steel did. And I think in some ways that movie, it's become cool to bash on it in the time since it came out. But when you look back at, just think about it. It didn't make 600, almost $700 million in opening weekend. People went back to see it again and again and again. Same goes for Batman v Superman. And yes, it underperformed, but it came out at a time when, like I think Captain America Civil War was at the same year, like months apart. And I remember there was a little bit of like overlap between the two of them as well. So having said that, like I think the pandemic, when that started, and Wonder Woman 1984 and the Suicide Squad that James Gunn made, those movies sort of just kind of took the brunt of the damage from the pandemic, which caused them to basically flop by default. Not to mention they were both on HBO Max at the same time. And since the pandemic has ended, we know movies aren't making as much money as they used to. We're not back to that normal, the pre-pandemic level of movie going yet. We know this because even other big franchises are struggling. And when you combine that with the fact that the DCU had kind of been directionless and we really didn't know where things were going, there was no overarching story. I like to point out this here. This is something that is going on right now in the weeks that when this video comes out, when you guys watch this. The Marvels debuted to 47 million. That's the lowest any Marvel movie has come out to, the lowest opening weekend of any MCU film. And it comes out at a time like when the MCU is in dire straits, seemingly. They can't seem to get a lot right. And as a result of that, from Quantumania at the beginning of the year, which even Quantumania came out to over $100 million, but then it failed to make 500 million in its box office, which is a pretty damning statistic. And its second week in box office drop was like 70%. Now the Marvels suffers like a second week in box office drop of almost 80%, going from 47 million in its opening weekend to like 10 million in the second weekend. I like to think that a movie, The Marvels, which I think is better than even like Thor: The Dark World and at least 3 or 4 other Marvel movies that have come out in the past that made more money. I think part of the reason why Marvels has struggled as much, where the previous movie made $1 billion, the Captain Marvel did, it has to do with the fact that it's part of a connected universe. And despite what people would like to say, some people say, oh, just make a good movie and that's all you need to do. Well, guess what? They made a pretty damn good movie with The Flash, but it had a lot of baggage. Barely anybody went and saw it, right? They made a pretty fantastic movie with Blue Beetle, a great time at the movies, a lot of good family themes. The visual effects were on point. And yeah, it was a little derivative, but ultimately barely anybody went to see it. And now we're seeing this with the Marvels. Not a terrible movie, not a perfect movie by any means, but not a lot of people are going to see it. And it's the MCU. I think like ultimately the point I'm trying to make here is you may believe in this or not, but I think there's a very real effect that being a part of a connected universe has on your movie's potential to make money or to not make money. Because up until recently, we only had a successful MCU to compare the MCU movies' performances to. But now we are looking at an MCU that's struggling, and all of a sudden the MCU's movies are not doing as well. So I think that knock-on effect of having the positive vibes around your connected universe matters. And I think the DCU has struggled with it terribly. Like the fact that nobody believes in the DCU has meant nobody believes in going to watch DCU movies, no matter how good or bad they are. And like, some of these DC movies that have come out this year have had good critics ratings and reviews, but even then people just didn't go and see it. And now we're seeing that with the Marvels, like which sitting with a positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience rate score is pretty high too, in the 80s or 90s. I think it was in the 80s last I checked. But still, for some reason, how else could you explain the fact that when the first movie made $1 billion, the second one might not even make half that? Like, and it has more characters. You've got like 3 times the lead characters, and you have Nick Fury. So I like to think that I think by that same token, the Batman and Joker have the advantage of not carrying any of the baggage of a connected universe, because when the going is good, your movies are going to do really, really well. But the going gets rough. The Suicide Squad is, most people will consider to be a better movie than the first Suicide Squad. And yet, when you look at the box office, the first Suicide Squad made more than 3 times the amount of money that James Gunn's The Suicide Squad made. So if you're going by just box office, then David Ayer made a much better movie. But if you're going by the critics' ratings, then James Gunn made the better film. But it's the first Suicide Squad came out at a very different time for the DCEU than the second one did. And
yeah,
I like to think that that's a big reason, that the connected universes that are surrounding these movies. And that's why I think we have to be really cautious about like where the new DCU goes, because if the Superman Legacy Creature Commandos don't hit the ground running with positive reception, then the future projects in the new continuity will struggle. Like do you agree, John? Like, do you think that's, how much water does that hold, like that theory that if you're part of a bigger connected universe, then the state of that connected universe really does matter with regard to how successful your project can be. Like your potential is tied to the larger universe that your story is a part of.
I think that definitely could be the case because I feel like it's a little bit tough for Marvel because one, they've been around so long and there's so many projects and all of that. So, um, because it's like there's honestly an ongoing joke that like every other Marvel movie has been like good. Like just this year, it's like, oh, Quantumania was terrible. Oh, but Guardians 3 was really good. Oh, Marvel's was terrible. Oh, but Deadpool 3 is looking really good. So it's sort of like that. It's sort of um up in the air in terms of one movie brings the whole ship down. I don't think that's the case because Marvel managed to keep chugging along with movies like Iron Man 2 and Thor the Dark World and stuff like that, and they managed to keep chugging along. I think it just depends where the universe is at that point because those were, I mean, Iron Man 2 was terrible and that was really early on. So, and they just managed to keep chugging along because I think um they had a good plan for it. They just kept going. So I think with DC, the problem they had is that once the Snyder movies were getting a lot of blowback from whether it's the majority or the minority, DC went into a panic. Instead of staying the course, they panicked. And they were like, okay, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to do this. I think what you need to do is, and I say this to Gunn and Safran, is stay the course. No matter how, like, Superman Legacy could be the greatest Superman movie of all time, but The Authority might blow hard. You just got to keep going. You just got to keep going with that plan you have because then, because look what's happening now. Um, with the bad movies, not a ton of them in like phases 1 through 3 for Marvel, they stayed the course. Now um with all these movies failing, and then on top of that, unfortunately, you have the whole Jonathan Majors incident. They're like they're kind of doing what DC did when they got the blowback for Zack Snyder's films. Is like, oh, we have to change everything now. Doctor Doom is going to be the villain. Secret Wars is going to be this. Oh, Kang Dynasty is not happening. It's going to be Secret Wars 2, and it's like going to be this whole thing. So now I think what you need to do is just stay the course and not have one movie bring the whole ship down because that shows to the people, whether that be fans or the general populace, that, oh, you don't have faith in anything you're doing. And people will see that, whether that be consciously or subconsciously, and be like, okay, clearly these people don't know what they're doing, and then just back off. So I think I don't think one movie could bring the whole ship down, but it depends where they are and who's in charge and what the plan is. I think there's a lot more moving parts, and then there's a lot more nuance in terms of like movies failing for a connected universe. And I think with Marvel now, it's just too much. Even Bob Iger sees that. He's like, there's too much. These Disney Plus shows have not been hitting much, with the exception of Hawkeye, Moon Knight, and maybe Miss Marvel. Um, so we just gotta stop with this but it's like it's just like a whole bunch of moving parts. And I think for DC is they were like, oh, we got to change everything because Snyder's movies are getting blowback. Oh, we got to change this now, we got to change this, and then it just became a mess. And I think that's why people became so disillusioned with DC. And I think what they need to do is just show they have confidence in their product. Because also the same thing happened with the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. Is Last Jedi was a huge failure in the eyes of fans, and they were like, okay, we have to fire the director, get a new writer, bring J.J. Abrams back, and then pretty much backtrack the eighth movie, and then also making a seemingly good ending, and it just became a mess. Show confidence. That's pretty much the main thing, is show confidence in your product, no matter how bad it is. It's like, okay, Sorry, we made a bad movie. Well, the next one's going to be even better. That's pretty much what you need to do, and I think that confidence could show to a lot of people. Obviously, not everyone. You're going to have detractors no matter what. That'll show people that, like, okay, these people clearly know what they're doing. I'm going to be more inclined to see it, maybe even in theaters, especially when theaters are getting more expensive. So I think that's the right way to go, is the confidence you have in your product, no matter how bad it could be.
I agree. I think that's the big thing, and I'm so glad you brought it up. That Warner Brothers really screwed the pooch like 3 or 4 times over the course of like from the moment that DCU started. Even the first Man of Steel, I think they just had some like Easter eggs in there. Like there was a Wayne satellite, and sure, maybe that meant that we could get a Batman in the future in that universe. But then they like rushed into a Batman v Superman movie that I think the mandate to turn Man of Steel 2 into Batman v Superman came a little too late into the process. And then they had to delay the Batman v Superman a year. And we ended up getting a movie that was pretty good, but they chopped 30 minutes off the theatrical version. And then, but we get an ultimate. So that's where the first big, like, sets of bad decisions come in. And then after that, of course, Justice League and everything that has happened since, it's like from regime to regime to regime, they've just kept on fumbling the ball. And each time, John, you were right. They were not showing faith in their own filmmakers and storytellers. Because can you look at it? I'm like, today, if they were making $700 million on a movie or $900 million, like they'd be like running to the bank saying, "Yes, give me more of that." Like, wouldn't you rather have a Suicide Squad that makes almost 700 million rather than a Flash movie that didn't even make 300? Like, like they've got. Look, DC has got some of the best characters in the history of comic books, IP franchise, whatever, ever. Like, if you gave me, like, how they say, like, oh, if you were to start a new basketball team, what player would you start off with? If I was a film executive, like if I just happened to be like, the lead executive, at the CEO of some new big major Hollywood studio, and I had my pick of, okay, so here's all these franchise IP out there in the world. Pick one, and that's the one that you'll, become the first cornerstone of your new movie studio. And you had to pick from Star Wars, Marvel, DC. I would personally be like, DC, please. Like, that's the one I'm gonna go with, because I've got 2 or 3 of the most popular comic book characters of all time: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. Like, who would not recognize the Batman logo? You walk around with that shirt on, or the Superman logo. They're so iconic and symbolic, and they're the oldest existing characters in the genre. I think there's so much potential there, and I'm so glad that, moving forward, it seems like with every step David Zaslav has taken so far, they're putting their faith in James Gunn and Peter Safran, and they're doing it in a way where, moving forward, they won't end up in a situation where, they won't give Peter Safran and James Gunn, the ability to do what they need to do, but at the same time hinder them by saying, "Oh, you can't. Let's do that a little differently. Like, let's put Dawn of Justice at the end of that title of that movie, just because it will, we want to hint Justice League is coming." No, like, give Peter Safran and James Gunn the ability to make those decisions, like Kevin Feige does at Marvel Studios. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them have more faith, and David Zaslav and co give this new DCU a chance to succeed, even if a couple of projects, stumble out the gate. And Superman Legacy will probably not make a ton of money. If it makes 500 million, 700 million, that's good enough. Like, the first Batman movie made like that much money, right? The Batman with it's most people think that's the best Batman movie we have gotten since The Dark Knight, and that's pretty high praise. But it didn't make $800 million. It made less than Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, which a lot of people would say is inferior to the Batman as a movie. But I bet you that if they continue on with that level of quality, the second Batman, the Batman Part 2, will probably make $1 billion. And that's the kind of foresight that I think David Zaslav and his team have, which I think is something that Warner Brothers, on the part of DC, have been missing for years in the past. So I'm so glad that we're gonna finally have that. And yeah, guys, let us know in the comments below. What do you think about these points that we've been making? Do you think that, being a part of a larger connected universe affects the potential that your movie has to make money at the box office, to be successful? Like, if you are part of a successful MCU, your movie will make more money by default, like Captain Marvel did. Or if you're part of a struggling MCU, like the Marvels is right now, your movie automatically has a lower ceiling. And do you feel that's kind of what happened with the DCEU? And do you think that same effect will be true for the DCU? Let us know in the comments below, of course. Like and subscribe for more content like this. We are here each and every day with more updates on all things DC and DCU related.